Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for using this beautiful Valentine's Day to spend an hour with us to go over FAFSA. We really appreciate it. My name is Niara Campbell. I am the program coordinator for Rise WVU, and I am happy to be here with you all. Today, we're going to talk about FAFSA, so much needed paperwork for all of our students that rely on financial aid to make ends meet in order to attend the university. And today with us, I have Kate Kim, who is one of the FAFSA trainers out at the Hub. So she'll be sharing with us some tips and tricks, and I think we're ready to go ahead and get started.
All right. Thank you, Nira. And thank you guys so much for coming today, for joining us. So I am going to talk a lot about FAFSA and kind of what that is, how it can help you, and also how it's changing. If you filed a FAFSA in the past and then tried to file one this year, you probably have noticed that timelines are different. The actual form itself is a little bit different. So we're going to go over the changes, what that means for you, what that means for your aid in the future, and just some things to be aware of. So I'd like to start out with, we did create a poll just with some general questions about FAFSA. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that. If you would answer, this is anonymous. I can't see who said what, and it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong or anything. But go ahead and read through, I believe there's 5 questions, and just go ahead and answer based on your current knowledge about FAFSA and kind of how it works. All right, I'll give about 5 more seconds to complete that. All right, let's go ahead and see how we answered as a whole here. So the first thing, is FAFSA required to go to college? We were split 30-70 on that. Technically, no, FAFSA is not required. You could totally go to college and never complete a FAFSA if you wanted to. However, if you framed this question in like with in mind, can I go to college without financial aid? A lot of us would say, no, I really need that. So yes, FAFSA is going to be required for me. So if you were thinking in that vein, I totally get it. But technically, FAFSA is not required to go anywhere. The FAFSA always opens on January 1st. Everybody said false. That is correct. Generally, and we'll talk about deadlines and dates and everything within the presentation, but generally, for as long as I can remember, the FAFSA has always opened on October 1st. This year was different. This year it was not available until the end of December. And that was because of FAFSA simplification, which we'll talk about. And you might have heard about it. I don't know if you've heard about it in the news or anything, but it's a pretty big deal and has, kind of been a problem actually. The third, WVU has a priority date, and that is the last day that you can complete the FAFSA. So WVU does have a priority date, but that is not the last day that you can complete a FAFSA. You could complete it after the priority date. You just no longer have priority on certain aid programs. So we'll talk about what aid programs might be available from the Department of Education. And some of those, if you complete your FAFSA after the priority deadline, would no longer be available because there's limited funding. So that's what's going on there. If you live on your own, you can complete the FAFSA as an independent student. Maybe is the correct choice there. Just because you might be self-supporting does not mean that you would be automatically an independent student in the eyes of the Department of Education. There are some really strict rules with who can be a dependent student versus who can be an independent student. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I will say we do have a lot of students here at WVU who want to file or want to complete their FAFSA as independent. They don't want to put their parents' information on there because they might have an apartment, they might self-support, they might have been doing that for a while, but that doesn't always make them eligible to file as an independent student. And lastly, you have to pay to complete the FAFSA. Everybody got this correct. It is false. We actually will see here. Let me get that off of our screens. So you'll actually see that FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. If there is ever a situation in which somebody is trying to get you to pay in order to complete the FAFSA, get out. That is not necessary and probably a scam. So there are people who there are people who file taxes. There are people who may help with the FAFSA, and that service may come at a price, but you never have to use something like that. It is always going to be free for everybody. So this is just like, intro, what the FAFSA actually is and why it's important. So it is an application for federal aid, and it determines the eligibility of students for those federal programs. Now, there are several federal programs. There's grants, which would be like the Pell Grant is the most popular one, most well-known. There's federal work study. And then there are federal loans. Now, there are a lot of different aid programs that are not federal. So we have state aid programs. So the state of West Virginia has like the West Virginia Higher Education Grant and the Promise Scholarship. And then there's a lot of external or institutional aid. So FAFSA is specific to federal aid. You have to complete it if you want federal aid. It might be required for other things. So if you are a West Virginia student and you have the Promise, then you know that the first year, the year that you apply for Promise, you must complete the FAFSA. So that's one of the application requirements for Promise. So other state and even institutional or external aid might require the FAFSA. You just kind of need to know what you're applying for or what you have, what you're renewing to understand if you need to complete the FAFSA every year or if that was just a one-time thing. If you're confused about what kind of aid you currently have, first of all, you can always look it up on your portal. So if you go to wvu.portal, portal.wvu.edu, sorry. If you look on there, there is a button that says financial aid information, and you can look at your financial aid anytime. So you can see what aid programs you have. And on our website, you're able to look up what the renewal requirements of that aid program are. If you're able to renew it, where does it come from? All of those kind of things are available to you. You can also contact the WVU HUB if you ever have questions about your aid or your renewal. Another thing about the FAFSA is it does need to be submitted every year. So if you are a student who uses federal financial aid, so let's say you're eligible for the Pell Grant. If you want to receive that in future years, you have to do the FAFSA each year. You should also know that your eligibility can change. So while most students are always going to be eligible for a loan, your eligibility for a subsidized loan, for work study, or for grants may change depending upon your income information. And we'll talk a little bit about that and what you have to provide on the FAFSA here in just a moment. All right, a couple other things as far as completing your FAFSA, things that you have to know or have ahead of time. One thing is your FSA ID or your Federal Student Aid ID. If you've completed a FAFSA, you have this. If you don't remember it, then you're able to look that up and to recover it on the student aid website. All contributors have to have one, and a contributor just means somebody who has to complete FAFSA or information on the FAFSA. So a student is a contributor, as well as maybe if you're married and you have a spouse, then your spouse might need to be a contributor. If you're a dependent student, then your parents would need to be contributors. So it just depends on your situation as who's going to be the contributor in your specific case. The easiest way to complete the FAFSA is to log on to studentaid.gov, and that is also the best option because it is the fastest process. You can do a paper FAFSA, but it takes like weeks to process. So online is definitely the best option and what we would always recommend. So just some dates for you. The 24-25 FAFSA, like I said, it did open in December of 2023. That was late. That was over 2 months late from the normal. Our priority deadline this year is April 1st. Generally, it is March 1st, but because the FAFSA was late in coming out, we did push that back a month. However, don't wait till the last day. For the priority deadline, go ahead and get it done as soon as possible. Because then, you'll have it done, it's out of the way. But sooner the better. We want you to be done with your FAFSA before that priority date so that you are eligible for the maximum amount of aid possible. For this year, the tax information that it's going to be requiring is 2022 year income information. It's always 2 years prior. So because this is the 24-25 FAFSA, it's using 22 information. And we'll talk about if that has changed, how that kind of can play into what you need to do to correct that on the FAFSA. Okay, so I mentioned before that this year we did go through FAFSA simplification, and FAFSA simplification was an overhaul of the aid system. It's probably the biggest change to the federal aid system since the FAFSA went online, from always being on paper and processed on paper to moving online. This is probably the biggest change since then. So it's a big deal. Several things have changed. Some things, just the name has changed. Other things, the whole process has changed. And a lot of these changes have already gone into effect, but this year is the year that the actual form changed. So this year is the year that students are seeing those changes. Some things in financial aid processing have already been changing the past like 3 years. The good news for you is this is going to lead to a more streamlined process. FAFSA used to be over 100 questions. It's now right around 36. So it should take you way less time to complete and be a lot more simple in what it's asking and what you have to do. We do have a website, and I will there's several links within this presentation. I'll make sure that this is available to you all later so that you can just go through it and use those links. But this one here is WVU created a FAFSA simplification page to kind of explain some of those changes. So if you're interested, you can certainly look at that. It's off the main hub site, which is hub.wvu.edu. So some of the significant changes that you might see are, first of all, your aid index. So that number that used to be important with like what aid you were eligible for it used to be called the estimated family contribution, or EFC. That is now going to be called the Student Aid Index, SAI. So that completely replaced the EFC. And this, yes, this is mostly a name change, but some of the components have actually been changed as well. Some of the components of how that's calculated. So we'll talk about that here. One of those things is household size. That's the name change, changing to family size. And that is going to be transferred from the IRS. So they're going to take the family information from taxes instead of asking for that on the FAFSA. Now, it can be amended. So if there have been family changes since the last time or since the 2022 taxes, there will be the possibility of that changing. But that's going to be something that's pulled through the tax information instead of self-reported. Number of college, this is probably one of the bigger things that we're going to see for most students. Number in college is no longer part of the calculation. So in prior years, the EFC for a family, like if you had a sibling who was also in college, therefore, your family income information and everything was the same. Prior to this year, the family income information and the estimated family contribution was calculated the same for both students and then essentially split between the two. That's no longer going to happen. So that means that some families might see their now called SAI actually higher than what their EFC had been in the past, because the number in college isn't going to be calculated or part of that calculation. Obviously, this is something that we're going to watch, and we're going to see how that is affecting students, because we don't know yet how big of a role that might play. Another thing is, in the past, you were able to just go on and complete the FAFSA. Even if you didn't have an SAI set up, you would be able to kind of create it in the checkout process of the FAFSA. As you were finishing everything, you would be able to make your FSA ID. That's no longer true. It's going to take longer to verify the identities for that FSA ID. So that's something that you have to go on and do ahead of time. Now, if you're a returning student and you've already done a FAFSA in the past, this is not an issue. You already have one, but it could be a important factor for new students who've never done a FAFSA, or for those whose family situation may have changed, and maybe you have somebody in your family who now needs to be a contributor who wasn't in the past. Easy example is, say you got married. Now you have a spouse and they're a contributor on your FAFSA. They may not have had an FSA ID before, so they would have to create that. One of the most important things, this is a really big deal, is students and contributors must consent to have their IRS tax information transferred to the FAFSA. In the past, there was the option to transfer that data, but now it is a requirement. And so that is something that when you get on the FAFSA, you will see a whole page that is a consent form, stating that you understand that your tax data is going to be pulled and that you're okay with it. It explains how it is secure and everything, and how schools are also going to keep that information secure. Bottom line, though, if consent is not provided, your FAFSA is not going to be valid. So that's why this is such a big deal. If you say, no, I don't want my tax information pulled, the FAFSA will still let you go on and input that information manually, but it's not going to process it. And that's a problem, because that means we can't process federal aid for you. So if you have any questions about that, we can talk about that a little bit, or you can read online about what exactly that looks like. But that's a big change, and an important change, and something that we want people to be aware of. And then last thing on this page is the net worth of family businesses or farms, no matter how large or small they are, will now be reported as assets. In the past, they only had to be reported if there was 100 employees or more. So now we're looking at small businesses and small farms reported as assets. So that's going to be a change as well. Now that does exclude a primary residence. So like if you have a family farm, and it's asking you to put in the net worth of that, you would exclude the amount of the primary residence if your home is also part of that land or whatever. Again, some of these more particular cases, if you ever have questions, please just call the hub and we can help you out. Okay, we kind of already went over contributors. We also have a webpage for this off the financial aid page at WVU. So if you have any questions about who is a contributor, who needs to be a contributor on my FAFSA, I will say that the studentaid.gov site, like when you go on to complete your FAFSA, it's pretty helpful. I think it does a good job of saying like who needs to be a contributor. But it's definitely, it's definitely something that you know, especially with the FSA ID having to be done ahead of time, you're going to want to know who needs to have that information. I do see a question, so let me pause. If you do not consent to your tax information being pulled from the IRS and continue with the application, does it give you a warning? Yes, it will give you a warning that your FAFSA will be invalid. So at the end, when you sign it, it's going to say like, hey, do you want to change your mind and consent to your information being pulled? Because otherwise this is basically meaningless. So it will give you that warning. It will also, I believe, like on your FAFSA homepage, I think it will say like, hey, technically your FAFSA isn't good to go. I don't know if it'll say incomplete necessarily, but I think that there's some kind of warning message that you will get. So yes, you will get a reminder that if you say no, and it'll obviously, it's going to try to prompt you to consent and to accept that. All right. So this is some more information about who's a contributor. I'm going to breeze through these, but if you guys have any questions specifically about completing the FAFSA or some of the contributor things, please go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can even unmute. Yeah, Alyssa, do you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you. So I've actually, so hopefully I did this correctly, already submitted a FAFSA in collaboration with my son. My question for you is, I am divorced, but I, at least in the end, was his primary guardian. So even though my ex-husband and I co-parented him, right, and now he's 18, when I was reading through the FAFSA, it seemed clear to me that it made sense that only I was a contributor instead of in addition to his dad. Does that sound like I got that right?
It is, yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely. So yes, in cases where the parents are divorced or separated, you're going to go with the parent who contributed 50% or more of the financial support. Now, this is a change because in the past, it had always stated that that was 50% or more of like who the student lived with 50% more of the time. Now it is a financial support. Now that might not change for some families, but for some families that could be a different factor. Like you could live with one parent more, but the other parent might actually be paying more of the support. So that is a change, but yes, hopefully that was clear when you completed that, that it is whichever parent you would consider to be 50% or more of the financially supporting one. FSA has also said multiple times here in the last couple of months that there is going to be a parent wizard on the student aid site. So families in this situation can kind of go through, enter some of their information, and the parent wizard would tell them which parent should be on the FAFSA. I haven't seen this yet. I searched the website yesterday, so either they're not doing it or it's still not out yet. But there is some information on the student aid site. Like if you would go on and search like who's my parent on the FAFSA, I know they do have some good like flowcharts and stuff. So hopefully those will help in most situations. Okay, I already talked about the data transfer. So the tax data will transfer automatically with consent, of course, like after that consent is given. And that's using the direct data exchange. That's just, it came about because of the Future Act. So it's the FADDX in case you see that. That's just the exchange that the IRS is using. The only situation in which you can enter your information manually and it be valid is if you give consent, but then for some reason, the IRS is not able to pull your tax information. Then you can add it manually and go through. I don't know how often that is going to be the case, but. All right, so let's talk about preparing to do the FAFSA. We've already talked about FSA IDs. You are going to want to create that up to 3 days prior. So if anybody is like going home on a long weekend or something, or you want to get this done, when you see your parent, send them this information, send them the website, say, hey, make sure you know what your FSA ID is so that we can get this knocked out really quickly when we're together. Also, I'm going to show you the website a little, actually, I'm going to show it a little bit later. But there is a place, like if you forget what your FSA ID is, you can absolutely go in and do like a forgot username, forgot password. You're able to recover that information. One thing I do want to point out is that if you don't have a social security number or your parent doesn't have a social security number, they are still able to create the FSA ID. They might need additional information, but that is not a reason not to try to do it. So that is something that is available on there. Whenever you go to create the account, you are able to create the FSA ID even if you don't have a social security number. Other things that you might need, any kind of citizenship information for like a permanent resident or anybody who's not technically a citizen but is able to do the FAFSA. You're going to want to have access to your 2022 federal tax returns because there are some questions that you are asked to manually input even after that data exchange. And there are some cases in which you might need that if changes have to be made. So if there's been a change since 2022, and we'll talk about that too. The untaxed income, for example, like child support, though it's going to ask you, did you have any untaxed income from that year? Your current cash savings and checking account balances, they'll ask you for that. And that doesn't have to be down to the penny, but like a roundabout, how much do you currently have in those types of balances or in those types of accounts? And then current net worth. If you own a business, a farm, if you have investments, or if you have assets. Okay. So let's talk about dependency. This is often a question. Like I said, that, students who live alone outside their parents' home may want to be independent, but that's not always going to be the case. So of course, a dependent student is a student who needs to have a parent reported on the FAFSA with them. An independent student can complete their FAFSA by themselves. It's not the same as what dependency is for tax purposes, which is, I think, where a lot of the questions come from. And dependency, automatic dependency is determined by questions on the FAFSA. So I actually pulled them. Here are the 24-25 dependency questions. And so basically I'll just go through these next couple of slides. You can kind of check these out or read them later. But basically, if you can say yes to any of these questions, then you could be considered an independent student. And that means that you don't have to have parental information on the FAFSA. A couple things. The active duty or the veteran questions, we have a lot of students who are in the National Guard here at WVU, and it's important to note that just because you're enlisted in National Guard does not make you a veteran and does not necessarily make you active duty, like even if you go to trainings and stuff. So there are very specific definitions for those. If you are in one of those entities, you likely know that. But if you have any questions about that, again, that's something that you can talk to the hub about, or also the WVU bunker would be a very good resource for those types of questions. Here's some more. The question about foster care, ward of the court. Many students who were in this situation have documentation that the financial aid office may require. I hope I get this correct. The McKinney-Vento Act. There is paperwork that, or no, that's the homelessness one. Many of these have, many students in this case would have some kind of documentation, often from their high school. And so if you are asked for documentation based on any of your dependency question answers, again, we can help you at the hub specifically to see like what kind of things you may need. It was this one, the McKinney-Vento is the homelessness or self-supporting at risk. Anyway, if you say yes to this, sometimes you are going to be required to show additional documentation. So don't be afraid of that. Just let us know and we can help you kind of look through and determine, look at what you said yes to, and we can help you determine what kind of documentation you might need for that. I just want everybody to know that you can't just answer on these and then it's like, oh, okay, cool, you're through. A lot of times some type of documentation is required. However, on the actual FAFSA, if you answer yes to that, you will go through and complete the FAFSA just yourself with no parental information on there. If you answer no to everything, then you will have to provide information about your parents. And then there is a circumstance in which a student might not have access to parent information. There might have been a situation in which they left the home, but it's not necessarily one of those that were covered by the dependency status questions. So there is an appeal situation for students in that situation. There is an appeal form that they could complete. Again, we are going to ask for documentation in those situations, but there's always, there's kind of always something that can be done if necessary. Okay. This is just a recap of for dependent students, if a parent or a spouse has to be on the FAFSA, who is it? How do you determine that? If your parents are married and living together, then both of them would be contributors, and both of them would have their tax information reported. If parents are divorced or separated and not living together, then only one. That's the 50% financial support or more would be the one that the student puts on the FAFSA. If parents got remarried, then the parent and step parent who the student you know, who provided 50% or more of the support. Those would be the ones on the FAFSA. Again, this is stuff that is covered quite well on the student aid site, and something also that the hub can help with if you've got questions. Okay. Let's talk about special circumstances. This is probably a big question because a lot of students will say, well, hey, my 2022 tax information is not really the best view of my family financial situation now. Things have changed. And that's fine. And we know that happens. And so that is what's called a special circumstance. And a special circumstance is a financial appeal. It's saying that, okay, hey, the financial information that we had at the time no longer is accurate. So this could be a change based on maybe a divorce or separation in the family, a change of income because of a loss of employment or a change in employment, a death in the family, impact of a natural disaster. There's a long list on our website. These are just kind of the most common ones that we see. But if you would look at WVU special circumstances, if you would just Google that, you will find our special circumstance appeal website, and it'll tell you what cases may be an appealable option, what you would need, any documentation that we might ask for, and how to complete that appeal. So that is totally possible. And again, that is something separate. That is once we get the FAFSA information. So you're going to complete your FAFSA information with your 2022 tax information and everything. And then once it comes to us, you can say, hey, actually, there were some changes. And that's something that we do on our end to update that for you. But I know that that's a common question, so I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew there is a way to update that to the actual thing, like what's actually going on now. All right, some common errors. Submitting the wrong aid year. So sometimes we have students call and say, hey, I don't see my aid anywhere. What's going on? And we're looking, and maybe we have a previous year FAFSA, so instead of the current. So make sure that you are looking at the years for fall 24, spring 25, and summer 25. You'll need that 24-25 FAFSA. Multiple years might be available on the student aid website, so always pay attention to which one you're doing. Contributors not consenting is going to be a big issue we're anticipating this year. Hopefully everybody consents and it's all good to go, but that could be a reason. If one of your contributors does not consent to tax information being pulled, that could be a reason that your FAFSA was not processed. Incorrect information, not enough information that was asked, incorrectly answering, especially to the dependency questions, or just not checking up on your account. Now, we have not received FAFSA information yet because the FAFSA opened late, because there's some issues with the Department of Ed processing right now. Things are going slow. We are not expected to receive FAFSA information from the Department of Ed until about this time next month. So that's obviously much later than normal for us. Normally we're getting those in November. So not getting them till March is a big deal. That's obviously going to push our deadlines, or not deadlines, our timelines back, but we're going to work as hard as we can to get everything updated and get aid offers out as soon as we possibly can. So one of the things that you are going to want to do is, after you submit your FAFSA, make sure that you're checking your email, because if there are issues, if you've been selected for verification, if we think that you need an appeal, if we need an additional documentation from you or anything like that, we're going to email you. So make sure that you are looking at your mixed email often and looking for any emails from the hub. That's how we communicate to you. And if there's anything needed, we'll reach out to you as soon as possible. Okay, so once you complete the FAFSA, you'll be able to get your FAFSA submission summary. That'll be on the homepage of your FSA account. So whenever you log into the studentaid.gov, you'll have your student portal, and you'll be able to see your FAFSA submission summary there. This might be delayed. Late February, possibly even mid-March, because we don't know if they will release those to students before they release the FAFSA information to schools. So it might be around the same timeline. Anyway, as soon as they're available, you will be able to see that. And those are, they used to be called student aid reports, SARS, in the past. So same information. It's just going to tell you, what your SAI is. It's going to kind of give you a summary of the things that you put on your FAFSA so that you can see and make sure everything is correct on there. Some students might be selected for verification. That is, that's just something that the Department of Ed uses to verify information on the FAFSA. And that's something that we might ask for additional documentation from a student or additional forms to fill out. That is when I say, check your email. That's when we would contact you and let you know what happened. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. For the most part, it's a random process. Kind of like when you go through TSA and they're like, oh, you got picked for, randomly search or whatever, like super. It's not the best situation, but it is pretty easy to get through for most students. So, and that's something that we can help you with, of course. If your situation has changed, obviously you could contact us to do one of those special circumstance appeals. We can help you through that. And then allow enough time for us to process. I know that especially with the timelines being delayed this year with FAFSA simplification, everybody's used to getting their aid offers here soon. And that's simply not going to happen this year. Like, let's be realistic. It's going to be probably a couple months until we can truly get all those out. But just know that once you complete your FAFSA and everything is good on your end, there's nothing else that you need to do. Just be patient for us to be able to process those. We will get aid on accounts as soon as we can. You should also know that deadlines have changed this year because of everything that happened with FAFSA simplification and the delay from the Department of Education. WVU has chosen, and West Virginia, the state of West Virginia has chosen to push back some of our deadlines. So normally our priority deadline is March 1st. It has been pushed to April 1st this year. So we do have an extra month there. And that is just for FAFSA completion. That doesn't mean that you need to, like, there's nothing else additional that you have to do. It's just going on completing your FAFSA. For the Promise Scholarship, if you are a new student watching this and you are applying for Promise, you will have to have your FAFSA completed by May 1st for that Promise application for this year. And then also for the West Virginia Higher Education Grant, it is May 1st. In the past, those have been about a month earlier as well. And then the WVU Pledge Scholarship, for renewal for that one, the FAFSA submission deadline is April 1st. Did the deposit deadline change? Alyssa, is that for like new incoming students for their like academic deposit?
Yes, I know that's sort of outside of this realm, but I was just curious if you knew.
I don't believe so. We can look that up when I switch to the browser. I believe that one is still May 1st.
Okay, it's okay. I'm part of the parents club and I do get communication about this, and it may be that I've even missed it, but maybe really what the question is it sounds like students, let's just say they're not an incoming freshman. So this truly is being felt in terms of the change in terms of timeline. They should still feel like, even though it's delayed, they'll get their offer soon enough to make their decision, right? In terms of, I guess that would be more specific to an incoming student who's looking at other schools. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I will also tell you that it is the general practice for us to process first-time freshmen first and process continuing students later. Part of that is because we're waiting on continuing students to register for the following semester because that can impact what kind of aid they might have. Whereas first-time freshmen, we don't need that information. We're just processing an offer based on their FAFSA. So those are generally released first anyway. So for incoming students, I mean, everything is delayed. Like there's no way around that. But incoming students should be processed first, whereas our returning students, generally they see aid offers in like mid-March. Now it's probably going to be, at least a month back, if not more for them.
Do you happen to know if, in the same vein, new graduate and professional students would also sort of be looked at the same way? They're incoming, they're new to their program. They're not first-time freshmen. They're, for example, first-year law students. Do you know if there's going to be sort of a priority there, or maybe there always is, as sort of what you're indicating?
I actually don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure because so a first-time freshman to an undergraduate program is eligible for a very different aid than an incoming graduate or professional student. And it's not always dependent upon federal aid. Graduate and professionals is usually more so like a departmental or institutional aid dependent. So I don't know. I'm really sorry. I
No
can find that
problem at
answer
all.
for you, but I personally am not sure how those are looked at.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you so much.
All right, this is the last thing, and then I am going to pull up the student aid website from here just to show you guys. But if you need help, if you have questions, federal student aid, which is studentaid.gov, is of course where you complete the FAFSA. But if you have any issues with the actual completion of your FAFSA or with your FSA ID, you're going to contact them. Unfortunately, WVU can't help you with that. Like if you have a problem with your FSA ID and you call the hub, we can tell you who to contact. But we can't help you. We don't have any access to FSA IDs or anything like that. So that's going to be a question for the actual Department of Ed. If you have questions about Promise or higher ed grant and those applications, you're going to want to go to wvhupc.edu. That is the West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission, and that is the entity that actually awards Promise and higher ed grant, and some other state aid as well, but those are the two big ones. And then if you have general questions or anything specific to WVU and your aid here that you see, you can contact us at the hub. Of course, during normal business hours, you can call us or submit a ticket online if that's your preferred method of communication. So let's real quick just go to studentaid.gov. Let's see if this will work. Yes. Okay, so if you're not familiar, this is the student aid website. This is where you're going to go to complete your FAFSA. Up here, we've got log in, create an account. So like I said, if you have completed a FAFSA in the past, but you might not know what your FSA ID is, they do have this. Help me log in, forgot username, forgot password. You can use those to get back into your account. There's a lot of information on here. If you are new to federal aid and you want to learn about these aid programs, you can certainly look at those on here. If you're ready to complete your FAFSA, you can do so here. You can also learn about how to make a correction, how to review your FAFSA, everything like that. Just know that this year, things with FAFSA could be on the slow side. Hopefully this all gets kind of worked out and next year is back to normal, back to opening in October, back to priority deadlines in March, and of course, back to a more early awarding timeline for students. But we'll see. And then it also talks about, loan repayment. So if you're wondering about the future, that's another thing that the hub can actually work with you on a little bit. If you have questions about grace period, repayment, deferment, all of those kind of things, there is information on here, but we can talk you through some of that as well. I think that's it. That's all the information that I have at this time. Are there any other questions? Anything that I didn't answer that I might help you with at this time? Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm glad, I could answer some things. I am gonna look up that oh, this is not what I wanted. Yep, that's it. All right, so it looks like it has been pushed back. Yes. This is saying deadline is June 1st for deposits. All right, well, if there's no other questions, I will get this presentation to Niera, and then she can make that available to you guys however that might be best. If you ever have questions about FAFSA or anything aid related, please don't hesitate to contact the hub. We can show our website too. Like I said, we are available on the phone, via ticket, which is kind of like our email system, or in person. If you are on one of our campuses and you want to have a face-to-face meeting, or we do Zoom meetings too, with somebody from our office, you can absolutely do that. So that's all available here. You can set up a meeting if you want to, or just call us or send in a ticket. That's perfectly fine too.
Thank you so much, Kate. This has been great. Likewise, if you have an incoming freshman or have a student on campus that you think could use some extra support, or you are a student and you would like some extra academic support, feel free to contact Rise at Rise, not at mail.wu.edu. We are available at that web address. And thank you so much for coming.